reasons why Alex Sue is appealing this disciplinary action, this emergency expulsion. And you listed 4 different, potential or possible scenarios for why a student might appeal a disciplinary action like this one. The ones you listed were that the student didn't do it, the student broke the rules but with mitigating circumstances, that the severity of the discipline is not reasonably related to the actions taken by the student, and that the student has reasons to not want emergency expulsion to stand on their academic record. And in brief, all 4 of those reasons are reasons why Ms. Sue is appealing today. I will come back around to why each one of those reasons fits this situation after I address some of the issues brought up in the district's closing arguments. Respectfully, it sounds like the district wrote their closing arguments before hearing any of the testimony that we've spent our entire day and evening talking about. The things that the district claims were clearly demonstrated were not clearly demonstrated in any of the testimony that they offered, any of the witnesses that they called, any of the exhibits that they offered. Now, what we heard from the district was that it's very clear that Alex Sue did certain things. Unfortunately, based on the testimony of the person who actually wrote the notice of disciplinary action, who told us what things were known at the time the disciplinary action was issued, and that was November 19th. The long list of things that Ms. Smith is attempting to attribute to Alex Sue in her arguments are not things that were demonstrated by the testimony and not things that were mentioned by the actual decision makers who issued the order of emergency expulsion on November 19th. So Ms. Smith would like you to consider a whole bunch of different things: posters, social media posts, being obscene, using obscene languages, playing some role in passing out post-it notes, playing some role in a crowd crush. That was in her opening statement. Posing a safety risk, telling people not to stay quiet. There's this long, long list of things that Ms. Smith would like to incorporate into the decision to expel Alex Sue on November 19th. Unfortunately, that long list of things introduced by Ms. Smith are not things that were considered on November 19th prior to the issuance of this order of emergency expulsion. And we know that because we've heard very directly, not only from the person who wrote that order of disciplinary expulsion, but also a number of other administrators who were involved in the conversation leading up to that decision. The person we haven't heard from is the executive director who made the call to authorize an elevation of this charge of disruptive conduct to the level of an emergency expulsion. This isn't an offense, even if disruptive conduct, as described by Ms. Smith, had been demonstrated. That doesn't automatically elevate a disruptive conduct charge to the point of emergency expulsion. We saw very clearly on the disciplinary matrix, when you scroll and look at what types of discipline are typically applied for disruptive conduct, those types, it stops. It doesn't even get to suspension. It doesn't get to emergency expulsion. It definitely doesn't get to a student having a permanent record of an emergency expulsion that will immediately hinder their chances to get into college. Ms. Sue's a senior, right? She's a senior and she's almost done with her time in this district, even if she isn't expelled, even if she's allowed back, even if she's not imposed, this discipline isn't imposed. She's applying for colleges right now. Her record right now is going out into the world and determining her future. So the idea that the district, such a minor amount of effort, such a lacking investigation, and then consider that sufficient to do their darndest to ruin a young person's life. It's just really, really painful. It's painful for Ms. Sue. It's painful for me to look at. It's been quite surprising for me to hear the difference between what Ms. Smith asserted was the reasons for Ms. Sue being expelled, and then hearing the testimony about the actual reasons Ms. Sue was expelled. When we heard the actual reasons for why Ms. Sue was expelled, and we drilled down into what elements comprised the category of disruptive behavior for the person who wrote the notice of disciplinary action and who considered everything that was known at the time the emergency expulsion was ordered, the elements come down to two things that were actually, beyond a, by a preponderance of the evidence suggested by any of the testimony or documentary evidence given today. Those two things were the use of obscenity and saying a student's name out loud. And the use of obscenity has a place on the disciplinary matrix. It's not an expellable offense. It's just not. Even if the district had accurately described its own reasons for expelling Ms. Sue on their own form, and if they had said it was disruptive conduct and obscenity and saying a student's name out loud, none of those things is an expellable offense on its own disciplinary matrix. And three of those things also aren't adding up to an expellable offense on their own disciplinary matrix. If you look at it, you have to get to many, many, many offenses before you even get to the point of requiring, on their disciplinary matrix, things like, a resolution session or a safety plan. So the idea that two non-expellable offenses adds up to an expellable offense just because they chose a different category to list on the form is not sufficient justification for the extreme impacts this has had and will have on the life of a 17-year-old who's just trying to get through school and go to college. It's not proportional. It's just not proportional. Not only is it not proportional, the severity is not reasonably related to the offenses described as the reasons why Alex Sue was expelled. It's also not proportional when compared to other people who committed other acts on the same day that Alex Sue is accused of using obscenity and saying a student's name out loud. On that same day, we've heard tons of testimony about how unsafe people felt, how threatened people felt, how surrounded people felt, that they were subject to a surge or a wave or a crowd that was uncontrollable. And it strikes me that the district would like to limit our comparison of proportionality to just the other students that were expelled. Well, that's a circular argument. It's the district who expelled those other students. So to say, oh yeah, it's comparable because we picked those students to expel, therefore we should have picked those students to expel, that's not a solid argument. What you need to look at is the severity of actual behaviors that were exhibited by a variety of students, hundreds of students, on the day of this protest. And you need to compare the discipline that was imposed on Ms. Sue with the discipline imposed on other students who committed other more severe acts on the date in question, November 19th. And that is one of the most disturbing things, I think, about the way the district has presented this case and the conclusions that it's hoping you will draw. What troubles me about this is several things. One thing is, from every description that I've heard of the investigation and the steps taken to determine that Ms. Sue should be expelled, it sounds like those are investigations that began with a conclusion. They didn't look for facts. They started with a conclusion, and then they looked for categories that would fit the conclusion that would allow them to expel Ms. Sue. That is not the direction of inquiry for an investigation. That is the directory of an inquiry for a kangaroo court. And I'm aware this is not a court, but it does have very real world impacts on Alex Sue. And if anyone in this room is an educator and they've become familiar with the research, this is exactly what people are talking about when they talk about student discipline being a school to prison pipeline, or being, you know, a thing that can be imposed without due process of the same level, without evidentiary standards of the same level, but then that lead to extremely negative outcomes for students. Students that are expelled have much poorer outcomes. They have harder times finding college placements, then they have harder times finding jobs, they have harder times finding housing. All of these are the cascading effects of the decision of a district to expel a student. And that's why these decisions have to be made with the most caution and the most judiciousness that it's possible to apply. And it's troubling that in this case, what looks like an investigation was not an investigation. It was an inquiry into how to expel Alex Sue, not an inquiry into whether to expel her or how to find out whether to expel her. That was the wrong inquiry. How do we expel Alex Sue is the wrong question to ask at the beginning of an inquiry that could lead to devastating effects on a 17-year-old's life. How can we hold one student accountable for the actions of hundreds? That's also an inappropriate starting point for an investigation. And it's extremely troubling to hear that there has been no inquiry that we can tell from the testimony of the district or the documents submitted into which students actually beat on the windows of Miss Woodard's desk area. We don't know which students did that. We know it wasn't Alex Sue because no one says that she was close to the walls or the windows of the main office at any point that these things were happening. Not a single person was able to testify, even though they have reviewed the video evidence since making the decision. No one was able to place Alex Sue close enough to the administrators in question, the walls in question, in order to place her as part of the crowd of people who allegedly beat on the windows and caused fear in the administration. Now, it's troubling that the inquiries of the district have focused on people who organized, who planned, and who spoke and participated in the protest. We have not been told that there has been any serious inquiry into the people who committed violent acts, or the people who committed threatening acts, or the people who engaged in threatening behavior against other students. We're told that this happened, right? We're told that students came to the office and complained that they had been confronted by other students, that they had almost gotten in fights, that they felt afraid, that they had to be removed from class. We have not heard anything that would indicate Alex Sue was the reason those students became upset. And more troubling, we haven't heard anything to indicate that the students who did engage, allegedly, in those behaviors have been pursued or investigated or disciplined with anything like proportionality to what has been imposed on Alex Sue. So that's what's troubling to me. The district would like you to compare whether Alex Sue's punishment was proportional to other people that the district punished for similar acts. The proper question is, was Alex Sue's punishment proportional to her acts? And was that level of punishment proportional to the severity of all of the acts that were committed by all of the students on the day of November 19th? And in both cases, the answer is no. This is not a proportional punishment to the severity of what Alex Sue did. And the district can't impose collective punishment, collective responsibility for every single thing that happened that day on Alex Sue or on 5 students. That's an issue. I can understand why it would be a troubling prospect for a district to investigate 200 or 300 students and find out which one of those was engaged in violence or threats or specific insults. That's a daunting prospect. That's a lot to go through. And I understand why a school wouldn't want to expel 150 or 200 or 300 students. That would be a major chunk of their student body, and that would definitely decrease trust among students in district and parents in district. But the alternative to doing that is not locating 5 scapegoats and blaming them for everything that happened on the day in question. That's not the proper inquiry. It's not the proper procedure. It's not the way this should be handled. You can't select 5 students from among hundreds and decide that those 5 students are the ones who are going to carry the burden of being expelled for all of the other students and all of their other behaviors. And I'm afraid that's what is happening here, because we have not seen testimony or evidence that Alex Sue is herself responsible for all of the events that happened at the hands of hundreds and hundreds of students on that day. So that's one of the reasons why I think the severity of the punishment is not reasonably related to what Alex did. It's also not reasonably related to what other students did. The first thing you mentioned was that one of the reasons people appeal disciplinary decisions because they just straight up didn't do it. And I think we've seen from the opening statement to now the steady erosion of claims against Alex Sue. We started with a disciplinary complaint and an expulsion on the basis of one thing, and that one thing was described as disruptive conduct, an expellable offense on the disciplinary matrix. We're told that there was some kind of inquiry by Executive Director Patty Seaworth to escalate the disruptive conduct charge to the point where it is expellable. We didn't hear from Patty Seaworth, and we didn't have any testimony about that. We didn't have any documentary testimony about her inquiry or her determination or her communications. So we shouldn't properly consider that. The fact that this was escalated and we haven't been told why. We were repeatedly told that an executive director made that ultimate decision and was consulted for approval of that escalation, but we haven't heard from that person. We haven't heard why that escalation to expulsion was implemented in this case. So we don't really know any more than what we've been told here. And what we've been told here does not warrant an escalation from something that should be a matter of, either a safety plan or a restorative justice practice or some kind of mediation to expelling a student. We haven't seen any justification for that type of escalation. Further, because I think what happened was the district probably started doing an investigation into Alex Sue's behavior after issuing an emergency expulsion. Then they generated a whole list of accusations that were never provided to Ms. Sue. They were never provided. Although there was a revision to the notice that was provided on December 3rd after my strident insistence that it be specified what Alex Sue was accused of doing, not just the category of rule that she broke, but specifically what actions she took that led to her expulsion. And I had to fight to get that revision. And then when we saw the revision on Friday, just before Alex was, due to complete her submissions for this hearing, we still didn't get specificity, and nothing like the specificity that Ms. Smith lists in her opening statement and her closing statement. Here's my notes in highlight. These are all the things that Alex Sue was accused of doing tonight. Tonight, she faced those accusations. That's the first time, right? In none of the notices have those accusations been described, but they were described in the opening statements here. And unfortunately, that was the peak. That was the most information that we saw all night that would indicate Alex Sue committed any of those actions. So Ms. Smith would have you believe that Alex Sue was expelled for a huge range of reasons, from social media posts to posters to not leaving a location when asked to, obscene language, leading chants, naming another student, having some role in passing out post-it notes. There's a litany of things that Ms. Smith has accused Alex Sue of doing. However, those things are not the things that led to the decision to expel Alex Sue. And now we know, because we've talked to everyone the district presented, and no one that the district presented, except its lawyer, was able to name these specific, repeated elements. There was no actual proof in the end. We've heard a lot about social media posts. Ms. Smith would have you believe that social media posts were a major reason that all this disruption happened, and a major reason why Ms. Sue was expelled. However, those social media posts were not considered in the process. They weren't considered. They weren't considered by the person who filled out the form and made the decision finally to impose expulsion on Alex Smith. That person didn't consider those social media posts. Further, it's been admitted repeatedly by multiple district witnesses that no one ever did the inquiry as to whether those social media posts even came from an account controlled by Alex Sue. Now, there's open questions as to how they even got those screenshots, those alleged screenshots. We've seen them presented as evidence, but no one in the district was able to explain where those screenshots came from and who provided them. We don't know. I don't know. The district might not know either, but somehow some screenshots of a social media post alleged to be from Alex Sue ended up in the district's possession. All the people who made the inquiry into whether to expel Alex Sue, nobody knew where these screenshots came from. So we don't know who may have set up that account, who was controlling that account, who was monitoring that account, whether it was private or public, whether that account was a Snapchat account or an Instagram account. There's a big difference. Snapchat is a chat function. It's like a text message with a group of people. So the people have to be friends and they have to be voluntarily a part of a text message thread, right? And that could be 3 people, it could be 100 people, but all of those people have to actually be friends with everyone else on the text message thread. And those messages, they're not transmitted publicly, they're transmitted to other people. So if this was a Snapchat message, it begs the question of how the district would get a hold of it in the first place and how they would classify it as social media. If this was an Instagram post and it was public, then the district could have trivially looked up on Instagram on a regular web browser. They could have opened up an Instagram account, opened up that Instagram account, taken a look and seen if there was any evidence that it was actually Alex's account or if it was just an account using that name. They could have looked into when that account was set up, what other accounts are held by that same person. They could have looked into those things and they didn't. Instead, they're relying on us to not really inquire as to where evidence came from or whether it's solid. This isn't solid evidence. The idea that these screenshots led to the expulsion is incorrect. They didn't. And the idea that those screenshots are necessarily even evidence of Alex's behavior, that's not true either. We don't know that they came from Alex. All we've heard is allegations. We haven't heard proof. So that's one way in which Alex didn't do the things she's accused of doing. When it comes to unauthorized posters being put up on the wall, we have one person testifying they saw Alex put one poster on one wall on the day of the protest. And that poster, which is the only testimony we've heard solidly, is like definitely Alex definitely put one poster on one location. That was the day of the protest. We can't say that Alex created the conditions of that day through posters, when she's only really been found in the testimony here to have placed one poster that morning. One poster that morning wouldn't have created this disruption. And I think you said it well in the middle of the proceeding. You said if one person said one thing, none of this would have happened. And I think that's true. If Alex Sue made one social media post, named one name, said F you Mola Beta one time, and placed one poster, none of this would have happened. It just wouldn't. Alex Sue herself is not a mastermind. She's not a superpower person. She can't control a crowd of hundreds of teenagers. We've heard from well-trained, well-educated, professional adults whose whole job it is to educate and keep safe and secure 1,800 teenagers. And we've heard from all those professionals that even with days' notice and tons of resources, you know, security professionals and law enforcement and all these resources they could have called on, that they were unable to control the actions of 150 or 300 students. So the idea that Alex Sue somehow controlled those 150 or 300 students is ludicrous. Alex Sue is a 17-year-old. Alex Sue is very bright, she's very gifted, she's charismatic, but she's not able to control the actions of 150 or 300 students. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the phrase herding cats. Well, that's what it's like to try to control hundreds of teenagers. I think, you know, everyone's lived experience can verify that. Alex Sue is capable of inspiring people. She's capable of generating sympathy if she expresses her lived experience of what's happened to her and her anger and frustration and hurt at being ignored and silenced. She can do that. It doesn't control what other students do in response to that. If Alex is able to inspire that level of frustration and, you know, the supposed absolute disrespect for the district, I submit that that respect didn't exist in the first place. One person's actions, one person's words cannot destroy a relationship between an entire student body and an entire district administration. If respect can be destroyed in one day, then that was a fragile edifice to begin with. In my opinion, and as evidenced by what we've seen as testimony today, there's just not, it's just too thin. Alex didn't cause this stuff. What happened is that there was a groundswell of sentiment, feeling, frustration on behalf of hundreds of kids. Hundreds of kids expressed their frustration with the district, and some unknown number, but definitely more than 5. Many students in the district put sticky notes on the walls, made posters, made social media posts, testified verbally, talked to their friends. Many students related stories of feeling unheard and feeling unnoticed and feeling ignored and feeling abused. And those things can't be manufactured by one student posting a few things on social media or telling her story. Those things cannot be created by the actions of one person like Alex Sue. Those conditions are created by a collective of students, a group of students, a number of students. They can't be coordinated. Things like this happen when there's a catalyst for an existing tension, an existing conflict, an existing feeling in the group that something's wrong. Alex Sue would never have been able to, or you can't organize a walkout just by putting up posters. You could ask anyone who's tried to organize anything. You can ask people who've tried to organize student clubs or people who've tried to organize football games for the school. You can't just put posters on the wall and have hundreds of students enthusiastically respond. You have to work. And there wasn't time or opportunity for Alex by herself to do that kind of work. What happened was an outpouring of public sentiment, an outpouring of student sentiment that reflects a pattern. And the pattern is a pattern, and I'm not going to make any statements about the facts, but it's a pattern of students feeling neglected and unheard in their own school that's supposed to keep them safe. It's a pattern of students feeling disregarded and feeling like when they try to use the proper channels, they're ignored. That's why protests happen. They don't happen for fun. They don't happen because someone's charismatic. They happen because people feel like there's no better option remaining to them, that they've tried other things and they haven't worked. And to hold Alex Sue responsible for all the actions of the hundreds of students that went out on that day is an attempt to hold Alex Sue responsible not just for the actions of the students, but for the actions of the district that may or may not have precipitated these feelings. So when I see the district responding to this outpouring, these many students crying out for help and attention, and the response of the district is to pick 5 of them and expel them and tell them they shouldn't talk about this anymore. That's not the action of a district that's attempting to resolve the pattern or resolve the relationships. If the district wants to resolve the relationships, then they have to do the hard work of engaging with all the students, the window pounders and the sticky note writers and the poster makers and the loudspeaker talkers and the call and responders. All those students need to be brought in by the district, not pushed out. They need to be brought into dialogue and brought into conversation. And I guess that's the ultimate reason why I find it so disappointing that the district is so strenuously resisted having any engagement with Alex Sue on the matter, even of this discipline, on the matter of this expulsion.
I'm going to object to this line of argument as exceeding our agreement about the scope of this hearing.
It's not an argument. This is closing statements, and I'm happy to redirect my comments. So one of the other elements that you said is that sometimes students are able to, or they appeal disciplinary finding on the basis that rules were broken, but there were mitigating circumstances. And I think the things that we've said so far and the testimony that you've heard from district employees is pretty clear. Alex, the only things that have been demonstrated by testimony here is that Alex used an obscenity to say the words F a teacher's name on one occasion. Now, the district wants you to think that everybody else saying things after that is also the responsibility of Alex for saying that one phrase, but ultimately nobody was able to say that they even heard her say it more than once. So one time, Alex said F this teacher's name. So she used obscenity. And that, if you consider it to be a plausible allegation, then that is breaking the rules. But I think there were mitigating circumstances. And I'm not going to go into exactly what they were because we do have an agreement not to talk about underlying issues. But I'll just say that one of the mitigating circumstances is that an individual student who says, fuck you to a teacher is very rarely subject to expulsion on that basis. We asked everyone we could in this proceeding whether they had any recollection of anyone ever being expelled for saying something like that one time. And nobody recalled that ever happening before. So it's a mitigating circumstance that the severity of the discipline that's been brought down on Alex for these 2 minor violations, that itself is a mitigating circumstance. It necessitates a strength and a resolve, and it necessitates fighting harder to appeal the disciplinary expulsion. So the other allegation of naming a student, I mean, frankly, saying another student's name out loud one time, even if it causes a reaction in other people, it's gotta be the kind of thing that a district who is populated by a bunch of people with really advanced degrees in education, a district has to be able to understand that the behavior of teenagers, children, is not perfect. They're not never going to express their frustrations. They're not always going to be 100% compliant. They're not capable of it. No one is. It's not possible to 100% of the time always respect the authority of every person who intervenes in your life. And so I guess what we need here is a little bit of empathy and compassion. We need empathy and compassion for the fact that Alex without going to any facts, and frightened and alone and hurt. And that being the case, and Alex Sue being one of the students for which the district is responsible for taking care of and for protecting, given that, and given the really rather trivial things that Alex Sue has demonstrated by testimony, to have at least valid allegations about, given that triviality, I just think that the district should be showing some compassion and recognizing that an adolescent who's not finished with development, who's going through, the process of trying to reach adulthood, who's in complicated worlds, the world of high school and the world of social media and the world of consent and all these worlds colliding at this moment where it's hard for anyone to establish who they are and what should be done and their ethics and their integrity. It's a formative time, and we call it a formative time because teenagers aren't done forming yet. They're not the people they will become. And that's why education is important. It's important because while someone is in a formative period, they're not done growing yet. And the people around them and how they're treated has a huge effect on how they grow and what they develop into. So I think, this is one of those things where Alex expressed frustration. Did she do it in the most advisable and productive fashion? That's not for me to say. What is for me to say is that she's not deserving of the most severe discipline imposable on a young person because she used obscenity and named a student because she was upset and frustrated. I think this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the district to reach out and show some compassion and try to make this the environment safe, not just from Alex Sue, but for Alex Sue. The environment should be made safe for her, not just from her. And I think that you as the hearing examiner also have an opportunity, and it's a grave responsibility. It's a big opportunity. And I know that we all get caught up in rules and regulations, and we get caught up in the details of our argument and our evidence, but ultimately everyone in this room hopefully has the same goals. And the goals I hope we share are the goals of ensuring that Alex and other students, but today we're focusing on Alex. I hope we share the goal of making sure that Alex gets the best possible outcome, the best possible care, the best possible support from this difficult situation. And I'm hoping that as the hearing examiner, your role in supporting Alex will be offering her the opportunity to move on in life without the stigma of an expulsion and with the best possible scaffolding for success going forward. Expelling her doesn't give her that. What would give her that is, support, compassion, additional services, maybe a counselor she can talk to, college prep, recovery of credits for time that she's missed, and deep engagement, not punishment. Deep engagement on the issues that have brought us to this point. Alex's issues, Alex's thoughts and feelings. We have to attend to all those things. We spend all this time talking about kids, and we have to talk to people. We have to talk with them to figure out what the best course of action is. And I would hate Alex Sue to be expelled for something that no one ever even talked to her about, like this expulsion in the investigation into whether to expel her. She wasn't even asked. She wasn't asked. She wasn't asked to do anything different than what happened. She was just punished after it happened. And I'm hoping that you decide not to continue punishing Alex, and that we can all work together to try to resolve the situation and repair it instead of making it more harmful. That's my statement.
Okay.